Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch. Badass women getting things done.
From Network Nova Live, it's March 22nd, 2024. And guess what, folks? You're on the Friday Power Lunch. I'm Catherine White, your host, bringing you the guests, the issues, the action, because what we love to do is fuel the grassroots across Virginia and now coast to coast, because when we get together, things happen, and we like to make politics fun. So I hope you're settled in. I hope you're ready to roll. I hope you got your coffee. Because today we're going to be talking about breaking down barriers and biases. Ain't no stopping us now. We have a great guest lineup. So give a Friday Power Lunch welcome to Amy Diehl, PhD. She's an information technology leader and gender equity researcher. And she's going to talk about her fabulous book, Glass Walls, Shattering the 6 Gender Biases Still Holding Women Back at Work. And the awesome Lynlee Thorne's here with us today, Political Director of Rural GroundGame, and Karen Baker. Karen Baker, courage. We talk about courage, right, Karen? Standing up to run in a very deep red rural district in CD9 in Virginia. We're just so excited to have Karen here with us. And our favorite Power Lunch member, Delegate Vivian Watts, is here. And there's a lot to say about her long storied history. She's one of the longest serving women in the House of Delegates in Virginia. We're so excited Vivian's here today. But let's get to some show business. All right, show business is that we're a friendly room. We like to also keep it real. So use the chat. Tell us where you're at, what you're doing, what you're up to. Talk about it, how this issue affected you, or maybe somewhere you stood up to be courageous. Let us know. And then the after chat, 1 o'clock. Well, that's our fun part, where we turn the lights down a little bit, stop the recording, and we get to chat, and this community gets to grow. We love that. And support the show. I'm so excited that we have 3 new patrons. We have a Patreon subscription that is really good for us. We appreciate and we love our supporters. Thank you so much for being a patron. And we want to say welcome to Julie Greenberg, Susan Troy, and Ann Stafford. Thank you so much for believing us women. Great team. And I'd like to welcome back Laura Martinez. Let's give a round of welcome back. Good to see you up in the room, Laura. So glad to have you at the controls, letting people in and out the room. And I want to have a special announcement, special news that we are going to be doing the Friday Power Lunch at Apple Podcasts, and we'll be on Spotify. So you can listen to us on an audio recording on the Power Lunch and wherever you get your podcasts. How cool is that? That is something to celebrate. And I also want to say a special happy birthday to 2 great teammates. March 25th, Stair Calhoun, Aries Unite. Happy birthday to Stair, upcoming birthday. Get your swag from Stair. And March 26th, we have Heidi Dragneff. I love, who doesn't like a birthday? And I was going to say, it's the year of the Aries, and that's good for this election because that means power and fire. So great, because no one is coming to save us. It's up to us. All right, so let's do it. Let's bring up Fanel, fabulous Fanel, with our hell no attitude. You got yours on today? What do you got on?
Yeah, I got on some sparkles today because I am all sparkly today because that is how excited I am about this show today.
Well, when you came on, when I saw you in the green room, and I was like, oh, I'm wearing this very feminine pale lavender, and I saw you come in with your black, I was kind of like, shoot, I should have done my Johnny Cash today. So I'm glad you're in. Fanel's in black. I love it. So
it's sort of my power color today. This is how I'm feeling, you know.
You're bringing it. And I wanted to talk about that. First, I want to talk about when I was thinking about this, how these barriers and biases can impact the quality of women's life. I was thinking about Tammy Duckworth, the senator. And when she wanted to have children and she was 42, she went in and wanted fertility treatment. And they said, "You're too old."
Yeah.
And now she has twins because she had to find a doctor who really didn't believe that and didn't think she was too old. But those kind of implications, in real time, they can really impact women's opportunities, economic, thrive, be able to thrive economically, right?
Yeah, I think that's why this conversation is going to be so important this morning. And I'm just happy. I listened to Delegate Watts. I've already had a chance to listen to Amy,
Right.
been reading her stuff. I think that we're going to feel so powerful and so inspired after today because we'll have tools also to understand what we can do better. And then
Right.
the other thing is that we can help each other get out of our way so that we can lift up other women. And I think that will be something powerful that comes out of the conversation today.
I agree because I think, when we were talking about this a lot, when things right now, look, as we say, could look grim, things that we see that at play in this extremist playbook to mentally fatigue us and keep us down. We talk about these, there's all kind of different barriers when we're talking about this, not just like the workplace, there's in the media, we see the bias, but we also see these attacks where they're coming at us constantly and really meant to wear us down. And it makes people feel like it looks grim, it's doom and gloom, but we know what hope looks like. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. That secret of coming together, like you just said, and how we need to organize and what
Yeah.
democracy looks like. Let's talk about that word. Like, what are we, let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, let's talk about it because it took me a minute to get myself there because
Hmm.
sometimes you've been waking up sort of afraid about what's going to happen, and you
Right.
know what, thinking about doom and gloom doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't change anything. The only thing that
Hmm.
changes is the actions that you do. And I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of what we need to do, what I need to do, what any of us can think about doing. And what I thought about is that I had waking up my last morning afraid. And that was last week. I woke up my last morning of being afraid.
Wait,
I
was
was
that
no
just last
longer.
week? Just
Yeah.
last week.
Yeah. Because we were working, but I was still scared inside. But I decided that I
Okay.
wasn't going to wake up afraid anymore. And I was going to be really optimistic about the work that we do. And I also thought about what it was going to take for our state, for our communities to wake up. And I thought, you know what? First thing we have to
Welcome to
understand.
Friday.
Well, look at that.
You see, it's
That's
powerful.
some
I'm
kind of
powerful.
signal for
The-
heaven. I don't know.
I know, I'm powerful. But
I love it.
the first thing I thought about really though is that the understanding that democracy is more than a word. And that when people start to understand that it's more than that, then they will also wake up and principled people will wake up. Because democracy, more than a word, when you start to feel that it's the song you sing, the dance you do, the rap you say, the book you read, the love you give, the sex you have,
Yeah.
it's the protest you do, it's what inspires you. And as we start to get people to feel that and see that it's in part of every bit of their lives, then we're going to be okay.
Yeah,
So we're
and
going
I
to be,
think, when I think about our this year, and we're using that as our theme for the Women's Summit, we say it's up to us. And that could also seem kind of, overwhelming, right? Like you said. But I think if you really look at what the empowering thing that we need to do is adopt the hell no, this
yeah,
attitude. And we can't stop because there's so much on the line. But I think, doing it together, working together, and also, we know what the power that we can do if we really put our minds to it, right? And I think that when we have those days when we're down, it's seeking out a friend, getting some coffee, and then just sort of getting back in the arena again. But we do need to take care of ourselves for sure. But I think that, we listen to some of the talking heads in the doom and gloom, and we talk about this a lot, but I think we need to repeat it. Democracy is more than a word. We need to tell voters, because I listened to a really great, Anat Shanker Osorio had her movement briefing yesterday. I don't know if you listened. I think you were on. I think we were all on. But I love that she talked about this word democracy. She said the average person doesn't know what democracy means. If you say democracy, so the word, like you're saying, it's the freedom to make your health decision, like Tammy Duckworth.
yeah,
It's the ability to go to go out dancing, have a drink, have fun without somebody telling you you can't listen to that music. We see that in some countries, and we see it happening in the United States, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what the
Right.
whole thing is about, is that we've just talk about this word like everybody just gets it, and
We
they
don't
don't.
get it, right?
They don't get it, and when we start to pull that together, they will get it. And the interesting thing is, when I hear talking heads on TV and they're talking about stuff, I say to myself, "You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's happening on the ground. You think you know, but you don't know. Uh,
Yeah,
but we know." We know. And so that's
we
why when
know.
we start to talk to people about at the doors, about the songs they sing, the way they pray, who they worship, all of these things, what they read, this is your everyday life. This is you.
Yeah,
People will say, you know what, I hear you. But
yeah.
we'll be the ones. It's not Joe Biden who's the messenger. He's not the messenger.
Nope.
We're the
It's us.
messengers.
Yeah, it's up to us. And like I always like to say, democracy looks good on you. And today, wearing your black is good, because I am so excited to get to the next segment with our special guest today. Because I mean, I learned so much when we were trying to research this topic. When I found out, like, we're never good enough at any age, I was like, holy shitski. Yeah. And when I saw the recent article by Kathleen Parker about Kamala Harris stepping down, I'm thinking, I don't know if I've ever read an article that told a man just get out of the way. I'm like, like that. And in the Post, like, step down and do us all a favor. I was like, holy shit. So let's get to next guest. And I'm excited to round up with our rural guest too. And Lynlee Thorne is here, Rural GroundGame, and Karen Baker. So welcome, 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 welcome. Hello. I would just want to say again that today we're talking to Amy Diehl, PhD. Let me introduce you, information technology leader and gender equity researcher, and your new book, Glass Wall: Shattering the 6 Gender Bias Barriers Still Holding Women Back at Work. I love it. Still holding us
Still.
back. So it's your first time on the show, and I'm going to say that when we found your articles in your book, it was just really a big aha moment for us.
Mhm.
So for the people in the audience, Amy, let's get to the origins of this research. What the story behind you and your partner, that the research partner Leanne Dubosky, realized that there was not just a ceiling, there were walls that shape women's experience.
That's
Let's
right.
get to that. Get to the origins. I'll let you have the floor.
Yeah. So it's Leanne Dubinsky, just to make
Leanne. Oh, sorry, Leanne Dubinsky. Yes.
Dubinsky, just to make sure we got her, Dr. Leanne Dubinsky.
Yes. Doctor.
So yeah, doctor. So yeah, I'll just start back with my personal story, which was that I did well in school and I really liked math in elementary school and high school, and so I had a female math teacher who said, "Hey, if you're good at math, you like math, you want to make good money, go become a computer programmer." So in 7th grade, I believe it was, I was like, okay, I'm going to study computer science, and so that's what I did. I took computer science when I was in in college, and it was male dominated, as you could imagine. There were usually 2 women in the class of 30 people. But I never really felt barriers or biases in college because I did the work and I got the grades. I got A's. I didn't sense anything was different because I was a woman. But then I started into the world of work, and I was very fortunate in that my first 2 direct supervisors were women. They were women software managers, and so that gave me they were like great role models and inspiration to know that, hey, I could do this. I could be a leader in IT. But then as I moved on and I started working, I started working for under men and in more male dominated environments. What I started to do was I wanted to be a leader, and I thought, well, I'm going to watch these men around me and I'm going to learn how to lead from them. What other choice really did I have, right? So I remember I had one very clear memory. I was moving my way up in the hierarchy, and at one point I took over a role that my former male boss had. So he was supervising a team. He moved up, I moved up, and I became the supervisor of this team. Went into a meeting with the team. We had to discuss a problem. We had to come up with a solution, and we had several options. And we talked about the different options. At the end of the hour meeting, we didn't have consensus. So I said, okay, we're going to take option B, or whatever the option was. After the meeting, people were coming, like my teammate, my colleagues, they were coming to me and say, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Like they were giving me all this negative feedback for making this decision. But I had literally watched my male boss do that same, like that exact same thing, like in plenty of meetings before me. And nobody ever had an issue whenever he was authoritative. So that was one of the first things that started me thinking, is there something different that's going on because of my gender? And I had, of course, had plenty of, mistakes that I had made and things along the way, like we all do. But I had taken them all to be my personal fault, my personal failing. I then went into a PhD program where I had the opportunity, through every paper that I wrote, I studied gender barriers that were affecting women. And I found out very quickly that a lot of the things I was taking personally were actually a result of my gender. They were things that were happening to many women. And I worked on that PhD, I got the degree. I went off to a conference in Utah where I met my now co-author, Dr. Leanne Dubinsky. And we started talking and we realized that we had very similar data sets. She had studied women in faith-based nonprofits and the challenges that they had faced, so religion. I had studied women in higher education. So, education, religion is thought to be very conservative. Higher education is thought to be much more liberal. But what we found was that these women they were women leaders, they were dealing with very, very similar things. In fact, they were dealing with all the same things, all the same barriers when we put that research together. That was the start of us combining our work and collaborating on this research, which has culminated in our new book, Glass Walls. What we've done with the book and throughout that research is we, at one point, we teamed up with 2 other researchers to create a scale to measure gender bias, a scale to comprehensively measure gender bias. Out of that scale development, we identified the 6 core factors. So when we talk about the 6 barriers in this book, they aren't the 6 that I pulled out of my head or our favorite 6 or right. The 6 that are most often talked about in the popular press. No, like these were pulled out in a very scientific way as the core concepts that undergird this more broader concept of gender bias. And so what we did for the book was we did more research and we expanded our industries. And in fact, we've got a lot of examples from the political arena because there's a lot of that is just out there in the public, in the press, that where you could easily pull the data. And it's interesting.
Right.
It's disheartening at times, but it's very interesting and it's very helpful. So we see our role as being to identify and give names to all of the different behaviors and processes and
You talk
things.
about that when you talk about that naming part. I think that's really important because if you can't name it, you can't find a solution.
That's right.
So I think what your research has done, again, you're identifying those 6 barriers. And I want to talk about this briefly, but I think the naming of that, because then you can identify and really talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I can give you a couple of examples. There were several concepts within several aspects of gender bias that just didn't have names. And like you said, it's hard to talk about, try to do a Google search. I'll give you one of them. One of the labels, the terms that we came up with was the term untitling. So this happens often to like women physicians. It has happened to myself, where the male counterpart is called Dr. So-and-so, but I'm called Amy. And I'm sure, I know that it happens in the political arena as well to people.
Dr. Jill Biden, do you remember?
Yes.
Yeah.
But even like representative or, calling Vice President Harris Camilla as opposed to Vice President Harris, right?
Right.
When we almost never call President Biden Joe. So that word untitling, well, the thing is, before we had the label, I would do Google searches to see, hey, what other research has been done on this? And I would be typing in like omitting titles for women. The results I got back were just not what I was looking for. It was just too like generic of and so it just shows you how it can, not having a label or a term can really make it difficult to solve to identify the problem and then to solve it. Yeah. Another one, your audience, I was going to give you another example. Another example your audience might be interested in is this term we coined. It's called role incredulity. And it's basically when people don't believe that the woman is actually in the position that she's in. And again, I know this happens often to women who are in political positions or campaigning, for political positions. It happens to women in any kind of male-dominated field where, for example, a woman is perceived or thought of as the administrative assistant or the secretary, and assumed to be that, as opposed to the director or the representative or the physician or whatever the role she is. So it may sound minor, like, the women then are put into an awkward position. Like they have to say, no, I'm actually the director. I'm actually your representative. I'm actually your lawyer. It's extra time. It's extra energy that the men don't have to deal with, but also their words and they don't carry as much weight when people don't believe that, they think, oh, she's just all these roles are important, by the way. There's nothing wrong with any of the any roles, whether they tend to be female dominated or they tend to be male dominated. But the problem is when women are assumed just to not be in charge because they are women.
Right. And I what struck me in the research too, is that what you really found when you worked on this, and you did, like I said, it's extensive research and the number of Fortune 500 companies and different leaders that you spoke to, but that you realize, and I think this is really good for women to know, is that, you're never quite right. Right. It's we looked at, if you're too young, I know you had a story, if you're too young, you're too old. And then you're thinking, well, I'm in my 40s. I'm in my sweet spot now. Right. That's not so. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was really interesting. We had two articles. One was in Fast Company, and the other was in Harvard Business Review. And by the way, all of my articles, all of my research is linked on my webpage, amy-diehl.com. But the Fast Company article was about the 30 critiques that women hear that most men never hear, and they were all.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking there's not 100. You only found 30. So
well, we only found 30, but they were 30 identity-based critiques, and they were surface based on research. And the research question was, what other aspects of your identity do you feel have impacted your experience, or what other biases have you experienced? So these were all identity-based critiques, and they ran the gamut from age. We talked about age, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, parental status, marital status, geographic regional location, where you happen to live. So it ran the gamut, right? And of course, none of these things have anything to do with one's ability to do the job. And I'll do the deeper dive into age. The age was really interesting because it was interesting looking through our data, because we like transcripts of data. First woman would say, I was told I was too young to lead. The next woman would say, well, I was told I was too old, like I'm too close to retirement to be, promoted or advanced. The third woman would say, well, I'm middle-aged now, but I'm considered old already. And I'm not considered either. Right. So we published this article, and what was really interesting was I put it out on my social media, and the great debate became for that middle-aged category, that sweet spot. Does it last for 10 seconds or 10 minutes? It's just, if there is a sweet spot, it doesn't last very long for women. It seems that they're go from being perceived as too young to too old in a heartbeat, unfortunately. And again, do we talk about, to the extent that we talk about this kind of things for men, it's just not the same. Often young men are seen as having potential, and are hired or elected or promoted based on that potential. Older men are seen as elder statesmen if they're older and they've still got things to contribute to workplaces and society. Yeah.
Well, I want to say again, for people that are just tuning in, we have Amy Diehl, Dr. Amy Diehl. She is author of Glass Walls, Shattering the 6 Gender Barriers, Still Holding Women Back at Work. And some of your stuff in the book, when we think about us as activists, right, in the grassroots, we feel the same way about that age. There is an invisibility to it. There's also sometimes, you can find that there is some power in some of the stuff that is assigned us, how we are able to operate. But I want, before we we want to really get to that one part, you have those solutions to some of those 30 critiques. And so I tell everybody in this room, get this book, order this book. We have the link in there, and look at some of these articles. I think you'll find them enlightening. Let's talk about the one that I love. You said, flip it. Like some of the things you can do to test if, what's going on. And then, because this is really important, you identified all this. Now there are ways to sort of break these barriers down. And so our workplace is more equitable. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, in the book, just quick promo for the book, we give solutions to gender bias at 3 levels: for leaders, for allies, and then for women themselves. The flip it to test it approach can be used by any of us, and it's really quick, and it's really easy. So flip it to test it was spoken about by sociologist Kristen Pressner in a TED Talk. It's out there on YouTube, and she's got a website. But basically, what you do is you take like if there's a criticism or something that's being said of a woman, you think, would the same thing be said of a man? For example, she's going to have kids and not want to work. She's going to have kids and not be able to work. Would the same thing be said of a man? He's going to have kids and not want to work?
Right.
Like, no. Or he's too old to be elected, or he's too young. Would that be said? Probably not. So it's in a really good way also, in particular, like in workplaces too. Like if if you're doing like performance assessment for somebody, and you're thinking, okay, this woman, these are the things I want to highlight. Well, think about it in terms of if it's their male counterpart, would you be, assessing them on those same things? Same thing for candidates running for political office,
Right.
And one of the things we see often is the women are they're above and beyond, they're scrutinized in ways above and beyond men for everything, their performance, their behavior, their appearance, their speech.
Well, let's talk about the speech. You made a remark to us that sort of was, we talked about it again because it was our voices, how women's
Yes.
voice. And I think about in that article I talked about with Kathleen Parker, talking about the vice president step down. She used the word cackling in the article. So talk about, that was very interesting about the microphone settings and all that.
Yeah. So we talk about this in the book too. One thing, women's voices are often criticized. And one of the words is shrill, cackling, like there's
Right.
lots of words, right? One of the things to keep in mind is that especially when we're talking about in the field of like media or people in politics or people that we're not speaking to face to face, we're hearing them through technology, like through my microphone, through a phone, through the television. Well, the thing about the technologies is that these technologies were all optimized for the lower range of men's voices, and so it makes women's voices sound like, to the extent that women's voices are high and high, like it makes them, it distorts them, I guess I'll just say,
Right.
would be the best way to say it. And so we're not hearing, when we hear women's voices through the technology, we're not hearing them as we would in real life. And so that's one thing to keep in mind, is that like the women's actual voice may not sound, it likely doesn't sound exactly the same as what you're hearing it over the media. So like Hillary Clinton,
Right.
Senator Hillary Clinton, I have never met her face to face. I've never had a conversation with her face to face. Every time I have heard her speak,
Right.
it's through some kind of media, which is same thing with Vice President Harris, right?
Right. Well, I think what you're saying is a lot of these things, from the gym to cars or optimized shoes, or for and medicine for pills. So I know we have to wrap up, and I want to thank you for being here. Your book, Glass Walls, like I said, everybody get the book. It's really, what we really believe here is what we read, we internalize it into our work, especially for our candidates who are running for office. And I find that your book does provide a roadmap to really to shatter those barriers, and then and for us not to internalize it.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you've want one last takeaway, and I would love to bring Fennell Norton up here, and if you can stay a little bit in the after chat, I'd love to have you.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, the last takeaway is just what you said. Don't internalize it. Don't personalize it. That was the thing I was doing before I knew. I thought I was personal failings. It made me feel better to know that it wasn't necessarily personal to me. Now, the identity-based criticisms can feel hard to depersonalize those. But if you can, it can take the emotion out of it. That can help you address the issue in a sort of a rational way, and it can help make you, at least if nothing else, feel better. But so I always say, do not take it personally. Just realize it's a systemic problem, and unfortunately, it's still happening to all of us.
Yes. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for being here. And Fennell?
Yeah, I think this was really awesome. And I love what you just said, Catherine, is that the purpose of this is so that we can figure out what we need to do about it. There's no need
Okay.
to have issues if you don't have a solution. And I think we can have a solution. So I love
Yeah.
this. So this should really be inspiring to our next guest, Lynlee Thorne, who is the political director of Rural GroundGame. And I think, Lynlee, I'm thinking that this has got you pretty fired up when you think about the work that you do and all of the women rural candidates that you support. So why don't we just start there?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot here. And it goes pretty deep. And I think as we're working on elections this cycle and really kind of like focused on the calculus of getting out enough of our folks to the polls, and we're deeply concerned about reproductive freedom and democracy itself and all climate change and all the things that we care deeply about. I think recognizing that, you know, leaving people out of the equation and diminishing the voices of women, and then also really looking at where race plays a role as well, and how the moment that we're in, the painful truth is we're here because we've kind of intentionally set up the way that we engage with each other and whose voice we choose to value and who we dismiss. And I think, full disclosure, I've not read Dr. Diehl's book yet, but I have listened to a few other interviews that she's done, and I definitely look forward to reading it. And something that I really value about it is that there's action items. And I think to your point earlier for now about deciding to not wake up afraid anymore, there's always something that we can do. And as I was thinking about the show today, I was thinking about just some more humorous moments where I've seen men do a really great job in a space where this is happening. One example, Ian, our executive director here at Rural GroundGame, but not a lot of people know him because he prefers to be kind of invisible. So I've been in meetings with him, with donors or other organizations where the eye contact is directed at him. And the question is really relevant to the work that I do and really should be directed towards me. The eye contact is at him. They're waiting for him to respond. And he's just sitting in silence and waiting, or just, going ahead and saying, this is for our political director. That's a small thing, right? But nobody is powerless in these situations. We always have an opportunity to not accept who the question is directed at and challenge that. And that makes a huge difference. It can create like a slight moment of discomfort. That's okay. That might just be what's needed for us to kind of recalibrate how we engage with each other.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I remember when I was at work is that I'd make a comment that no one thought was that big of a deal. And then a man would repeat it, and then they would all be like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And so after it happened a couple of times, then I would say, yeah, Charlie just made the comment that I said a moment ago, and then I'd repeat it again. And so there are all kinds of ways and tools that we can use to make sure that our voices are heard. Lynlee, I wanted to talk about you
I
and
just really dream of a day where Charlie himself would simply say, hey, Fanal had this great idea that I want to support, and let's hear more. Anyway, carry on.
it's coming, it's coming. But I want to talk about what I always tell you in private that I want to say in public, which is I always talk about your bravery in terms of the rural communities that you go in. There is no fear in terms of the way that you just jump right in, which is really helpful to candidates that you support. And I think people think that there's this huge apparatus around you that gets this work done, but it's just you and Ian and a few others. And so I want people to always know that just like we give men grace for what they do, we should make sure that we're giving women grace for all the work that they do. And I want to also just talk about the provocativeness that you have in terms of some of the ideas that you have. Can you talk a little bit about the postcard campaign that you did a year ago that I thought was really provocative about women's rights and about their uterus? So talk about how you thought about that and really to say, I'm putting this out there.
Yeah, I think truly our work is really based on our engagement with volunteers all over rural Virginia, but increasingly also partners in what we call the urban crescent here in Virginia. And I think that part is key, because just like we need the Charlies of the world to speak up, we also need the Catherine Whites of the world to, invite me to a fundraiser that I probably wasn't supposed to be at, and have, a certain Democratic elected official in the room say out loud that they're only going to invest in, quote, the districts that matter. And because I was in that room, that created the uncomfortable moment that probably needed to happen for them to be like, wait a minute, maybe there's not a district that doesn't matter because our people are in all of them. But to the the idea with the postcard and digital ad and text that we send out, just kind of reaching out to women to communicate that your vote is private, just as your uterus should be, because again and again and again, and I think this will come up for Karen Baker and her race, and really anyone who runs in a rural area, the thousands and tens of many thousands of doors that we've knocked in rural areas, we regularly have the experience of a woman might crack the door open just a little bit and let you know that she's supporting Democrats, but she might be in the home with a man who's not on board with that. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to reach each other and, have more outreach by speaking to those issues in a way that they're like, yeah, I'm feeling like I'm not capable of making these decisions, and challenging that to let them know that they're not alone.
So Lynlee, I want you to stay with me, and I am going to bring up Karen Baker, who is the Democratic candidate in Virginia's 9th Congressional District. It's a rural district in southwestern Virginia, and we can talk to Karen together about her race and what she's doing. So Karen, welcome to the Friday Power Lunch. Let's talk a little bit about this race and how you decided to jump on in.
Okay, thank you for having me today. I'm Karen Baker. I am from Floyd, Virginia, which is a small town in the 9th District. I have a background that makes me able to imagine being in Washington. I can hold my own, having been a federal administrative law judge, assistant general counsel of the EEOC, and a trial attorney with 30 years of federal service. I'm also a nurse. I went to nursing school after retiring from the federal government because I wanted to serve, and I wanted to serve person to person, and I did that. So I have a breadth of experience that makes me a credible candidate. I also have a history of being a servant. I've always seen myself as a servant of whoever I am working for. And that's what I tell people in the 9th District. I'm here to serve you. I'm not here to make a career of being increasingly important. I'm not moving on to the Senate. I'm here to serve you. And of course, this is where my age falls well. It's a good thing. I decided to run because everybody else was afraid to run. So your fear thing fits in here. I don't know if you can see this. This has been tattooed on my wrist for many years. It's Latin. It means don't be afraid. So that's one of my lodestars. Don't be afraid. So I decided to run, and I've been in this race for 3.5 weeks, during which time I have devoted my time to 3 things. One, I need 1,000 signatures to get on the ballot, and we're going to make it. 2, to going to every Democratic county chair that I can and speaking to as many people as I can. 2, 3, get their committees energized to support me and to get out and work for me and for Tim Kaine and for Joe Biden. Now, when you speak of despair, I think that that's been kind of the way the Democratic committees feel about the 9th District, sorry, that's my legal background speaking. The 9th District is because we just kept losing. We've had a farmer who was very credible. We've had a military vet. We've had a young environmental activist. And now it's me, the old lady. So, okay. It's like, actually, I think I have somewhat of an advantage here because the ninth district is filled with older women who are tough and strong and independent and have kept their families together through all sorts of despair, loss of jobs. Their children are leaving because there are no jobs, which means their grandchildren aren't there. Their husbands are losing their jobs and there's nothing for them. So there's a lot of despair in the district. And I'm more able to speak to that and say, I get it because I have been through it too. So I
Well,
think there's
Karen,
some advantage. Yeah.
I think that's pretty awesome. And I think that I loved it when you said, I can hold my own. And so that gives me a great optimism. And I think that one of the things it gives you with Lynlee, because Lynlee holds her own too. And I think it feels to me like that you are interested in trying some really different things and a little bit of innovation. So before we go, because our time is up, Lynlee, can you talk a little bit about the really great billboard campaigns that you were doing that certainly may benefit Karen and the work that she's doing?
Oh, Lily,
Yeah,
yes.
I will definitely put information about that in the chat. And in terms of innovation, just from an awareness perspective for everyone here, the selection is coming quickly. And really the opportunity to innovate is really now before the primary is over. So we are doing a lot of work at the moment to reach voters around the issue, specifically talking to voters that our mutual friend Roberta Thacker Oliver is always talking about, the folks who are registered but simply not voting at all. In the 9th congressional district, that's over 200,000 voters. And they need to hear from us. So there's a lot of innovative ways we can go about doing that. If you have those ideas and want to participate, there's a lot of ways to do that. But once we get into campaign season and the coordinated campaign is up and running and things are getting locked into place, that is purely implementation and execution of those plans. So if you want to bring your ideas to the table, now is the time to do it. Yesterday, but today is just as good. But don't wait. We'll be doing a lot of the projects, like I said, the billboards, the texting outreach, the doors, in a lot of different districts, and I'll share information about that in the chat. Something that I think I just want to point to, one thing we know when we recruit candidates is that women typically have to be asked 5 to 6 times. Men normally just have to be asked once or sometimes not at all. So I just want to point to the fact that I think it's really valuable to hear Karen point to her past and to say that she is qualified, she is credible. This is a great example for women to hear and see and recognize, because it's hard to do. We don't make it easy. And I'm hoping to see a world where we have women step up and say, yeah, I stepped up. Like, why wouldn't I? Clearly better qualified than Morgan Griffith. So really glad to see that and happy to support you.
So we have about 10 seconds. And so Karen, I'm going to give you 10 seconds and then I know we'll have to go to our next segment.
Okay, what I just want to say about the barriers that I face, it is called pastors, and they're telling their congregations that men get the word from God and men spread it to women. Women in leadership of any kind is very strange. So I have to do this door-to-door convincing people, individual people, that I'm not something that's going, that I'm theirs, I'm for them, and they have to overcome what's visceral for them. So that's a huge, huge barrier.
So we'll work on that with that whole your vote is private thing. So you guys have been listening to Lynlee Thorne from Rural GroundGame, the political director, and Karen Baker, who's running for Virginia's 9th congressional district. Thank you both.
I'm so inspirational. And I'm going to say, stay for the after chat because we will be talking further with Karen Baker. And I feel like those barriers, and I know that we're here speaking now with Delegate Vivian Watts, and we're just going to continue this awesome discussion. And I, what Karen said, I mean, just her bio and stepping up. I don't know. I was thinking about you in that moment. I didn't plan to really talk to you about that, but it just gives me such hope to listen to this woman stepping up in this very red area. And I know you stepped up years ago. So there's very similarities in the age and the sense of what you've seen and just that courage to just do what life demands in a way.
Well, I guess at that time, and I still want it on my tombstone or in my crypt or wherever. There you go again, Vivian, just doing what needs to be done. That was very much the way I was raised. I was raised in Michigan. I still call it pioneer stock. And very quickly, my father worked all his life on the Great Lakes. Year after year after year, I only saw him for 2 months. For 10 months, I saw a woman do what needed to be done. And that balance of being able to handle the 2 months when the patriarch returned, therefore seniority in the General Assembly, okay, they have their role and you will work with it, but you will also do whatever needs to be done. So when I was listening to Karen, what I took away was what I liked hearing is that she was really looking at who she was. Because if you're going to deal with these stereotypes, you've got to deal with them out of your own strength. Each of us are different. I'm not the same woman as every other woman who is on this, on the power lunch, which is one of the reasons why I try very hard to listen to the power lunch, because I'm hearing all kinds of different perspectives from women in genuine voice. And that strength, that genuineness lets you get through a lot of things that are thrown at you. But certainly in politics, it's also that again, I'll stay with the word genuineness, that voters are looking for. Can I trust you? And if you convey what they can feel is true, it goes a long way in whether or not they're going to have the confidence to vote for you.
Well, yeah, and you bring up a really good point too. I mean, from your beginnings and what you saw and were able to model, right? When you bring that into your life. I mean, being, we are again here with Delegate Vivian Watts, the longest serving woman in the House of Delegates. I love to say that because on the other side you have Senator Lucas, and I feel like that balance is pretty powerful, because with it brings such knowledge. And like I said, there are times that that I've seen you speak up when you needed to speak up on that floor. We talked about equality for women. When you have that now, that knowledge, that understanding, that I don't know if you had it at the beginning so much, but as you grew into this role, talk a little bit about that. When you
in one sense, I did.
Yes.
In one sense, I did. Certainly, I still say to this day, I never intended to run for office. I'm a nerd at heart. I'm an introvert. And those are labels that I own. They're not the old lady labels. They are labels that I own. And so you stepped up and did what needed to be done when it needed to be done. But in coming into the General Assembly, there had only been 21 women who'd ever served in the General Assembly before I came in, which is why I made the correction on the introduction. I actually was first elected in '82.
Yes, you were. Yes.
Almost a decade and a half earlier. So my span of awareness of women in the legislature has that breadth to it. And so coming in, while I had an excellent mentor, I still very, very much, if you will, and to this day, read the room. And that's where being the youngest child and being a nerd and being an introvert is an advantage, because you're really looking for all of those clues. And how do you fit in? How can you, my favorite phrase for survival is bloom where you are planted. How can you do the maximum of what's possible where you are, rather than worrying about what you can't do, how you're kept down? It's sometimes I thought at various times, as things I've witnessed over the years, that it was designed to put women down, to get you all upset and off track about something else, rather than keeping focused on the job at hand. And so that also became part of that survival. Today, in the last 5 years or so, we've gone from a maximum of never having more than 19 women in 2021 to having over 30 today. And I can't tell you what a difference that is for me as a woman to say things and observe things that I wouldn't have in the past, not because I didn't think they needed, because the audience wasn't there to hear them. Now we have the real, I highly recommend that you look, and I wish I had the date for it, and I'll try to post it at some point on the chat room. The date that Delegate Jackie Glass talked about the reality of having been raped.
Yes.
And what that means to a woman for a lifetime. And she said it with such truth and strength that is not a comparable that I would have felt that I was going to say at a given time. Why do I say that's important? Because again and again and again, all I hear about rape is from the other side of the aisle when they're talking about, oh, the poor little ladies, we've got to protect them from these awful criminals. And whatever you're doing in criminal justice is just wrong because it's going to end up with someone being raped. Using that as that victimization as an excuse to do some very inappropriate things in the criminal justice arena, always with the fear factor that somebody's going to be hurt, as opposed to really looking at what the survivor is going through and what it takes to support the survivor, rather than always talking about the fear factor that they use rape to
well, I think what you're bringing up, Delegate Watts, is that, having more women in leadership, it really changes the conversation and the tone, and it brings different policies. And I think we see that in the General Assembly this year with the amount of bills on contraceptive equity, economic bills around, families and health and education, a real focus on these really, call it kitchen table issues. But the reality, I don't know if you caught the speech by a woman in Nebraska. It made the papers too, that she was a senator there, and she had to tell her own story about the abortion she needed, and she was actually denied that abortion. She was still carrying a pregnancy that wasn't viable, but she had to speak the truth to these people on the floor that they're just misinformationing all about the reality of women's health care and reproductive choices.
And having heard that statement and the breadth that it added, it really underscores, for me in particular, for over 20 years, I've been on the criminal law subcommittee where all of the abortion legislation went under the Republican control of the House. And so I've heard it year after year after year. And I've heard a lot of other discussions of defining crime. And for a moment, to think that you can define all of the conditions of pregnancy, including trying to get pregnant, all the way through, that you can define this as being a crime, whereas the more women that speak out about the reality of our reproductive history, the more that this nuance of life begins the moment that egg and sperm meet, and anything that stops that has got to be wrong. Well, a third of the eggs that are fertilized abort immediately because there's not a viable joining there. And anyway, I'm getting into detail, but it's those many details that we, out of our women's experience, need to express. It's not just this kind of black and white definition.
The reality of our world that we can now, when you have more women at the table. Well, in a wrap up with you, just and being here for Women's History Month and the celebration of the ERA today, do you want some, with Fennell's with us to wrap up, some words of wisdom from Delegate Vivian Watts? What would that be today? I'm putting you on the spot.
Again, the words of wisdom, I've got to come right back to bloom where you are planted. Go for your strengths, identify your strengths, be who you are, which is a wide variety. Don't put us into one box.
Oh gosh, that's a great wrap up. So hopefully you could stay with us in the after chat. We
Mhm.
missed you. And thank you for being here. So wonderful. Oh my gosh. For now, I'm just telling you, it's another great show. It was so awesome to hear from Dr. Amy Diehl today with her book about these glass walls. We heard about the ceiling. Who knew about the
Yeah.
walls? How about exciting that? Lynlee Thorne, political director of Rural GroundGame. And then really was inspired by Karen Baker stepping up to be a candidate running and bringing, talking about those rural barriers, which can be geographic distance and also cultural and the norms that are expected out there. And then to
Yeah.
wrap it up with Delegate Vivian Watts and just her long historic career in the House of Delegates. I don't know how you're feeling in black now.
Yeah, so I'm feeling really good, and I still have to get that tattoo that Karen Baker has, and so I know we're right up
Yes.
on time. But I wanted to say what I loved about Karen Baker. I loved everybody, but this is will be the one thing, is that she said I can hold my own, and she identified the challenge that she would have, which is around women voters. And one of the things that we know for sure is that when you identify the problem, you have solved half of it. And so I think that that's pretty powerful in terms of, women speak. So I'm pretty excited.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah. Well, the tattoo, I'm almost thinking maybe that's what we have to do is all get that tattoo. What do you say? I don't have one. So, well, yeah, you ready? All right. Well, like as we always say in the wrap up, we like to do a teaser. Next week, we have our monthly show. If you put the Substack in of the Grassroots Connector, you'll see that last week we kind of we had a great parody with our one and only Carrie Short from Cova Coalition, who did a parody of Katie Britt. You have to watch it. It's so much fun. It will just add a belly laugh to your day because you just can't make this shit up. You know what I'm saying? And so it's in the Grassroots Connector, and every month at the last Friday of the month, we do a special show with our national community because we're collaborating to win, because like we say, it is up to us. So we're getting it done. And next week we'll have Ellen Cassidy on. She's an activist and author of Working 9 to 5. You know the song, but Dolly Parton in the movie. We'll be talking about the women's movement and labor union and this iconic movie that, I think that we need to watch this week. And we'll also have a team from Arizona, the Native American Democrat postcard program, and that will be interesting to talk about. And Judy Kincaid is going to be here talking about leafleting every door. She's from North Carolina, and we're so excited to have that team. So again, well, as we wrap up, big news, we're going to be a podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You'll be able to find us. That's a good reason to give us to join our Patreon community today, because it adds an expense to us to do this, but we need to grow. And that extra $5, $10 a month, or maybe you want to make a one-time eventually contribution to us. But we are moving on and grooving, and there ain't no stopping us now. You got to stay for the after chat. We're going to run credits. Thank you to the whole team. Welcome back, Laura Martinez. Let's roll it, everybody.